All right. It looks like we are live. So anybody who is going to be hopping on, welcome. Um, this week is Chapter 6 of Inner Space. We are going over Chochmah and Binah and the quasi slash semi Sephiroth of Daat. It's actually quite a short chapter, and interestingly enough, we've gone over a lot of what's already said in here just because it came up in conversation. So we will go through it again. But if you've heard us talk about this before, it's because we've already talked about it before. So anyway, but not to skip over it because they are good and very key and foundational ones to get to know. So again, quick disclaimer: we're not teaching; we're just reading through the book and discussing what we're reading, and try and bounce some ideas off one another in an attempt to gain more understanding. So take everything that we say with a grain of salt, and go and learn it for yourself. If you've got a teacher, then even better. And then last but not least, it's important to remember that all of the stuff that we're discussing right now, in the theoretical Kabbalah, is not to be taken literally. These are tools, if you will, for us to be able to understand how to connect as finite beings to connect to an infinite creator. And so don't walk away saying, oh, there's some Sephira, something called Sephira, called Chochmah out there that's physical or even spiritual in a sense. These are concepts and ideas and frameworks that we use to be able to connect to Hashem. So yeah, don't take them literally. That said, understanding them and understanding the structure will help unpack a lot of what Chazal and Hasidus say, because they talk about this stuff all the time. So Chochmah and Binah. Chochmah is loosely translated as wisdom. Binah is translated as understanding. They are the what we would call the intellectual Sephiroth. They're not the emotional ones. The emotional ones are down below. And so these are the Sephiroth that are, in a sense, they're still Ein, so to speak. They're still nothingness. They're still attached to Hashem. They're kind of like, um, I'm not coming up with the right word for it, but they're still like kind of above. So we'll get into something later on called the breaking of the shattering of the vessels, and Chochmah and Binah did not completely shatter in that, and so I don't want to go down that rabbit trail too much, but they're on a very high level, and they're right under Keter, which we went over last week, which is the crown. And so one of the things that what was hard for me early on is coming from the Christian tradition. The definition of wisdom and knowledge and understanding are kind of like inverted more often than not. And I don't know if this is a standard thing, but every time anyone had ever described this or discussed it, wisdom would be like, or knowledge would be information, right? So to speak, it would be the information that's out there, and then wisdom would be knowing what to do with it. And that's how it was always understood, or at least was always communicated to me. So it took a while for me to kind of reverse, because it's actually the opposite in the way that the Kabbalists and Chazal relate to it. They actually look at wisdom as being the basic structural information of the universe, so to speak. It's the basic axioms, so to speak, of reality. And then Binah is understanding, is the ability to intellectually interact with those basic axioms and begin to develop theories around them. Then Daat, which is right below those, which is the quasi-sephira of Daat, which only shows up when we're not considering Keter. Daat is known as knowledge, and that knowledge really is not, again, it's not information so much as it is actually taking those basic axioms, understanding those basic axioms and how they relate, and so setting up theories and then using those theories here and now in the real world. So like we had talked about last week or the week before, basic axiom would be that the moon travels around the earth. circles the Earth. That just exists. It's a piece of information, right? And we can observe that. And then as we observe that, we can develop theories around how that works, and we can develop the theory of gravity and the theory of motion. And so with those theories, physics, we can then begin to put together a rocket ship, build a rocket, and fire off a tin can with people inside of it to the moon. So that firing off to the moon would be Daat. The basic theories that we would use to develop that rocket and develop that system would be Binah, and the basic axioms, so to speak, would be Chochmah, or wisdom. So it's just inverted from what I always understood. So I don't know if that helps out anybody, if anyone's having trouble with that that's watching this. But if you are, you're not alone. One of the other one of the ways that in this chapter that I like, the way that it kind of explains Chochmah, so to speak, is how would you explain red to someone who's blind? The color red. If someone's been blind since birth, there's no real way to communicate the color red to them because they don't have any experience with it. And so Chochmah, which is wisdom, which is the basic axioms, to be able to receive that, you actually have to be able to observe it and interact with it in some level, in some form. So I see something that's red and someone points out to me and says, that's red. Well, then I can begin to associate that with other things and I can develop a theory of red, so to speak. But without having access to those basic axioms or those basic data points, so to speak, I could never build a theory about red because I have to interact with it or have some experience of, viewing it. And then once I've viewed it and experienced it, then I can color, right, so to speak, and draw a painting or a picture. So I'll pause there. I don't know if anyone else has anything they want to chime in or share. It's just kind of the basic intro. Any thoughts, any ideas, any corrections?
Well, I just find it interesting. Some of the ways the book, describes Chochmah and Binah. Whenever I think of it in my own terms, I put it together much the way you already described it, Seth. In terms of, I think of Chochmah being basic axioms, or in my mind, it would be like, understanding things on a principle level. Whether it would be the basic laws of physics or what have you. And Binah would be, the process of logically putting those things together, and kind of reducing them and constricting them into some context, or something like that, into something we're going to do with them, or those type of things. But realizing that the whole thing really exists, above the level of really separating or distinguishing these things necessarily. They exist at this level, but in the same sense, in terms of consciousness, there's not a distinction between them. They're just sort of happening, and so when we exercise, Chochmah and Binah, often, in the mind's eye, they really don't seem to be that separated. And sometimes I wonder if this isn't why, like you said, Seth, I had the same thing growing up, that, I had this idea of what knowledge and wisdom were, and that type of thing. And I kind of maybe think that that's what they come from, simply because, in most people's mind's eye, don't have the ability, we don't have the ability really to distinguish them. And no one has really ever explained to most people, that there is this distinction, because when we see it, it becomes obvious. It's there. But I really find it kind of fascinating, and a little, very different for me to think about when the author's talking about Bezalel here. In terms of, um, what he's saying here in terms of the tabernacle, and they call it the microcosm of creation. He's looking at, of course, Hashem gave to Bezalel, Chochmah, Binah, and Daat in order to have the abilities, and then of course later as well the skills to build the Mishkan, to build the temple. And so, in terms of that pattern and what would require to do that, it's very interesting here. It says that Rashi, well, it's Rashi really. Rashi explains these divine qualities as they're related to Bezalel. He says, Chokmah is what a person learns from others. It represents the ability to master a subject and integrate its fundamental axiom into one's mental process. So, in a sense, what he's describing there is that sort of like Chokmah is a download, you know, and downloading some fundamental understanding or fundamental information. And then it says Binah alludes to the ability to extract additional information from that data already received. So, in other words, one might download something like the concept of gravity, the concepts of motion, inertia, those types of things. Um, you know, uh, the concepts of up and down, and that type of thing. And from that, then be able to extrapolate some other type of principle, like if I build something with a big foundation and what's above the foundation is smaller than the foundation is, or the foundation is broader, then it's going to have a better chance of standing than if I make a little skinny foundation and have something very broad sticking way up in the air. And so, so there's something that we can extrapolate, based on just in a sense, it almost seems intuitive, but I think it's mostly because of the level that this is at, because it seems like such integral. Chochmah, Binah, and Daat all seem so integral with one another at that point that it almost seems intuitive, but really one does stem from the other. And so then when we get to from this level, what Daat, it says in the books, in the wording of the book, Daat refers to the special divine assistance that Bezalel needed to accomplish his work, which is now that's very interesting. Because I would have defined Daat within this context of Bezalel then envisioning a way in which he could build a mishkan or build something with a foundation that is built correctly in order for something smaller or less weighty on top of it to be able to stand on it with longevity. And so it would be sort of the beginning of envisioning something which constricts the idea into this context, but then fully utilizes the axiom. And so but here it seems to be defining it almost really as divine assistance in even being able to have that perspective. So that's something that's a little different to me. I'm not quite sure what to do with it, honestly.
Yeah, it's you're commenting on finally Daat when he says finally Daat refers to the special divine assistance that Bezalel needed to accomplish his work. There is a footnote for that. We're in what, chapter 56?
Right.
See what the footnote says. Oh, footnote 3. No, it's just giving us the Rashi, just telling us
Right.
where to find that. I was hoping it would have something more there.
Yeah, leave it to Rashi to confuse us and just walk away.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and for anybody coming on later on watching, there's going to be plenty of things that are going to throw you for a loop in the ways that people are grasping at this. Don't get discouraged if something, comes up and you have a challenge with it. Just put it on the shelf, and later on something will will you'll hear something, someone will be saying something, and all of a sudden you'll remember that thing that you had a tough time with, and you'll go back and be able to unpack it somehow. So if you ever like run into stuff like that, just kind of like we are right here, it's okay. Um, learning this stuff is supposed to be hard. It's hidden. It's hidden for a reason. It's not. It's not hidden. Um, what was that verse in Psalms that says it's the glory of God to conceal a matter, and it's the glory of kings to search it out. And it's not the glory of kings to know it; it's the glory of kings to search it out. And so that searching is actually meant to be difficult, so to speak. That actually, this is slightly off topic, but I heard perhaps probably one of the best explanations for Zimsum, and the simplest explanations for Zimsum that I heard in a long time about this last week. And the person was sharing how, and we've already talked about this, how the whole purpose of creation was so that God could bestow the greatest good upon mankind. And obviously, there's no greater good than God Himself, right? So, how do we bestow that on us? Well, it's through cleaving or clinging or connecting to Him, right? So, if God's desire is to bestow that good upon us, and that good comes through clinging to Him. Um, Another basic fundamental principle in that process is that God did not want to bestow it on us without us having a role to play in the process. He wanted us to have, you know, a to participate in that receiving of that goodness, and so He wants to bestow it, but He wants us to work for it. This is getting back to the bread of shame, where if it's just given to us, then we receive it and we might enjoy it, but we still have a level of shame, so we can't fully enjoy it. Just like if you have a toothache and you're given the most delicious steak, that doesn't mean the steak isn't delicious. It just means that there's a deficiency in you that would keep you from being able to fully appreciate that juicy steak. So what God gives us is work, and the work that He gave us was actually cleaving to Him. So we look at it like so this is interesting. Like if the goodness that He wants to give us is cleaving to Him, and then the work that He gave us is the same exact thing. It's cleaving to Him. So the reward and the work are one and the same, and so that the Zimsum allows for that, the restriction, if you will, and the concealment of Himself is what allows for that work to happen, and in us pursuing uh, cleaving to Hashem, which is called devakut, we are actually in the doing the work, we're receiving the reward at the same time. It's quite an interesting concept, I've kind of understood that for a while now, but the way that this person described it, it's just it was like it took what was became a complicated concept for me, and it's just becoming more simple again. And it's neat to see that happen. How you'll go complex, very complex, and then all of a sudden, Hashem will bring it back down to its simple form. So, yeah. Sorry for that rabbit trail, but maybe it'll help somebody. Chochmah and Binah. It is interesting, Eric. You brought up how it shows up in the building of the tabernacle, because it also shows up in the creation of the universe, right? It says God founded the earth with wisdom, Chochmah, and established the heavens with understanding, Binah. It's Proverbs 3:19. And so we see that that heavenly establishment using Chochmah and Binah, but we also see that earthly establishment, the earthly place. God created a space for us with wisdom and understanding in His universe, whatever we want to call that universe. It's more than a universe, right? But in His space, He created a space for us. And the things that He created first before He even created that space was Chochmah and Binah, right?
Right.
And then for Betzalel to create a space in our area that He created for us, for Hashem, the same thing had to happen. Betzalel had to use Chochmah and Binah and Daat to create that space for Hashem. And it's like a mirror image, so to speak. And this kind of helps with understanding the whole concept that you hear in the New Testament. That they may be one as we are one, I and you and me, so to speak. Us and God and Him and us. Now, how's that possible? How can we both be within each other? Well, this is kind of showing that process, so to speak, on a cosmic scale, if you will.
Well, I think maybe it's interesting that you just kind of threw in that discussion on Zimtum too, because the next thing in the book, the very last couple lines on page 57 and over on to 58 is almost a whole nother definition, a whole nother perspective on Chochmah and Binah. And so it's very interesting because I think it's applicable to what you're talking about here. It's moving to the more in the order of the creation. Whereas it says Bina is understanding one thing from something dissimilar. It is related to the word bain, meaning between. Thus, Bina applies distance and separation. Okay, and so, well, I'll just continue reading here because when you look at something logically, you have placed yourself at a distance from it. Chokhmah, on the other hand, is made up of the same letters as Chochmah, with the potential of what, or the power to question. Chokhmah thus refers to the question of what something really is, its essence. And it goes on to talk about the color red, but in terms of creation, you know, um, in the Dzimtzum, the Kokma aspect of of the universe really would seem like it's something like identifying as a thing, identifying the concept of the universe, and identifying all the axioms which must be in order for this to take place. And then Bina would actually be then that idea of there needing to be a separation then for it to take place. So Bina is, in a sense, the conceptualizing of everything that comes below it in terms of the Sefirot,
Right.
and so it's kind of a, that part's kind of is really neat. I still wish I understood a little better what Rashi had to say concerning Daat, but in terms of um, this aspect, um, it's showing, it's showing, of course, Chokmah, it's describing that as being in the aspect of Yod, whereas Bina is in the aspect of Hay. When we see the diagram of the Sephiroth, they're beside one another. But he's talking here about an incremental order, a descending order.
Mm-hmm.
And so in this sense, we're seeing a um, not necessarily a horizontal type of relationship, but we're seeing a very linear relationship. Something that is in a descending order. And so when we look at how Hokmah interplays with Bina, and then Da'at, and within that framework. Well, now maybe we can look at Betzalel a little bit too, because in terms of what it means to be given this divine inspiration, because is it saying that the divine inspiration now is something different, kind of that middle column? Well, maybe the divine inspiration is the Chokmah and Bina, and so in that sense, the Chokmah Bina is coming down into Da'at, and that is and that's what he needed in order to be able to you know envision what the rest of this below it is going to look like.
Hmm.
I don't know if
You've
that made any
you made me
it made
you've
sense
made
to
me
me.
wonder, huh?
I don't know if that made any sense. It made sense to me while I was saying it.
Well, you set me off on my own little rabbit trail, and I'm still trying to figure out if it makes sense at all. So I'll just throw it out there and we'll see if it sticks.
Okay.
But there's the concept of like the three levels of understanding, so to speak. Whereas you got the lowest level of understanding is known as submission, and it's basic information. It would be I think we talked about it before. Like if we're defining a snake, we define it in neither good nor bad terms. It would just be the basic information about it. But then the level above that would be the separation, right? Well, good snake or bad snake, right? Snake in this environment is good, snake in that environment is bad, so to speak. But then you get up to the higher level, which is the level of sweetness, and at that level, it is all snakes are good. so to speak. And you can look at this with the Nachash and the Mashiach, so to speak. Hi, Bubba. Sorry, my daughter just came in. Um, and so what I'm wondering is if there's a parallel, so to speak, between Chochmah, Binah, and Daat. Chochmah and Binah seem to make sense. You know, Chochmah is those basic axioms. It's almost like this unified kind of whole, so to speak. There's not really any differentiation going on between them. And then you get to Binah, which is obviously it implies separation. You're starting to create. You're interacting with it, and you're understanding. You're categorizing, right? And you're putting different things in different places. The only one that doesn't quite fit for me yet is Da'at, because Da'at seems to be more of a rubber meets the road, action using those things, so to speak. And I don't necessarily see that as connecting to the submission portion of it, which is the basic. It's just a basic description side of it. Maybe my perspective on the three levels of understanding is limited, or maybe my perspective on Bookman being is limited, and it's probably both actually. So, anyways, I don't know if anything sticks from that, but that was just where the rabbit trail you sent me down on that one.
Well, it's really good. That's a good one because again, I mean, we're kind of going slowly through at this point, but in terms of on page 58, one of the things being described here is a whole other aspect of Chokhmah. I think, in a sense, as I'm reading through this again as we're discussing it, it almost seems like maybe the author is just kind of building layers upon the understanding of the definition here. But so he's saying here, mid, I think it's the second full paragraph down on page 58. In other words, it says Chokhmah wisdom is defined as the information input in a person's mind, just as Chokhmah wisdom constitutes the axioms of creation on a Sephirotic level. It goes on, in human terms, it corresponds to the fundamental axioms of cognition that lie behind all our thought processes. Okay, so and then goes on that these axioms are both built into our minds at birth and integrated from our subsequent life experience. And so these are those truths that we just come into life with. These ideas, and then life's experience also then sort of allows us almost a more intuitive level of truth, you know, that we have to work with, sort of as our baseline. You know.
Hmm. Mm-hmm.
Oh, I don't know if you're familiar with the laws of modesty, Tzniut. The laws of when I
Yeah.
was younger, I mean, I discounted it as, oh yeah, you don't show your elbows and cover, but the concept upon learning all these ideas, it stems from this relationship between Chokhmah and Binah, and this
Mm.
hiddenness, this concealed knowledge that's only revealed and it's a very intimate relationship. It's this idea of when Chokhmah and Binah come together, then there's this knowledge, and he says it in on page 59. He uses the analogy. Um, it's like the intimate relationship between a husband and wife, and when they come together they know each other in a very intimate and private manner, which is where the laws of concealment come from. That is a special guarded relationship. And the practical application of this obviously is the ideas of modesty, both for men and women, but obviously women have a lot more of those laws that they adhere to in regards to modest dress, modest behavior, and it's the idea of this guarding of this relationship. So and there's actually a whole section of the Zohar that talks about this, and it relates it back to Chokmah, Binah, and Daat. Out of this relationship comes this intimate knowledge, and it's interesting because if you follow at the end of this, he's getting into this idea very quickly of the shattering of the vessels, and the idea of the laws of modesty are related directly to the shattering of the vessels and this hidden relationship, this aspect of God. And if you look, a lot of the term, a lot of the symbology used in the Tanakh is it's the husband seeking the bride, especially when you get into Shir Hashirim, was a Song of Songs. You get this like very intimate, sexually worded imagery, and bride and groom and the wedding, and this is the relationship, and this is this highest level of concealment, and the idea that you're not going to openly be sharing the most intimate aspects of yourself with the world. You have a lower level, a much lower level. You have the face that you put on at work and the face that you put on with your, one group of friends or another. You're a different person with a spouse or your parents. And so, sorry, 1 second. Um, and I don't know if you're familiar with Rabbi Bax. So just reading a lot of out of the RE, and Bax talking about that it's this hiddenness, this aspect, and relates it to like the concept of Hester Panim and Purim. And I'm trying to gather my thoughts here one moment, a little scattered. But I'll come back in a moment. I'll get a couple of the quotes if I can find them for you. But I just was really amazed, like something that I discounted as, wear long dresses. It had a very deep, highly connected source for these way that you conduct yourself, especially in regarding that relationship with, which is a reflection of our relationship with Hashem, the bride and the groom. That why so many laws in the Tanakh, in the Torah itself, revolve around those intimate relationships you have, how you relate to your husband, how you relate to your wife and your children. And a lot of the Kabbalistic ideas of this relationship stem from this idea of this modesty. Let me just find it for you and come back and gather my thoughts a little bit better. So sorry.
Well, no, while you're getting that, Elishiva, I just want to read actually that paragraph that you were referencing on page 59 because it's just good, and I don't want to try and ruin it by trying to paraphrase it poorly. It says, this is the second paragraph on page 59. It says, again, in terms of the relationship between man and woman, Chochmah, wisdom, must join Binah, understanding, as the confluence of Chochmah and Binah, Daat, knowledge, is equivalent to the idea of a complete union of opposites. The only way that men and women can love each other, not only physically but mentally and spiritually as well, is to remove all the barriers that separate them. In essence, a man and woman in love can get close in a way no other two human beings can. This might be the reason why the Torah makes use of the concept of da'at, knowledge, especially for Adam and Eve. They are the paradigmatic human beings, and therefore the love between them must have been the greatest love that ever existed between two people. Thus, looking into the sexual union as a mere physical act is not da'at, knowledge. And so, just it's interesting seeing that it's a union, if you will, of opposites, or connection of opposites. And that leads into the next section, which kind of goes into how Chochmah connects to the past, if you will, and everything that comes from the past, and then Binah is, if you will, the future. And so Chochmah connects to Zachar, which is the male aspect, right? And then Binah connects to Necheva, meaning the female, right? It's the womb, so to speak, and it connects to the word Nekev, which is to pierce. So Chochmah, if you will, the basic axioms need to pierce, if you will, into Binah, and in Binah, that's where the future is gestated and born, and 9 months later you have a child, right? And then there's this thing in the middle, which is Da'at, which connects the two. And Da'at, if Chochmah is the past and Binah is the future, then Da'at is the present. And the present, what is the present? But it's actually the connecting point between the past and the future. It's what connects and unites the two, so to speak. And it's where we exist, if you will, in our ability to do things. It's where we are, we're the realm of action, so to speak. Because the basic axioms, exist, whether or not I recognize them or not. If I'm blind, the color red still exists, so to speak. And if I can see in the color red and I understand the color red, well, that understanding is something that kind of, it almost exists in the future and in the past, so to speak, if I've got that. But there's this there's this present time when I can actually do something with the color red where I could paint. And I can only paint here in the present. I can only be a painter, if you will, right now, so to speak, and then it becomes the past if I've done it, so to speak, or if I'm planning on doing it and I'm thinking about it. Well, that's the wisdom and the understanding that I have of how colors work, piercing into the future, and I'm actually seeing what I'm going to paint, so to speak, and I'm thinking about it, and I'm visualizing it. But then there comes that moment in the present where I'm actually doing the painting, so to speak. So that's a different way of kind of relating to those three Sephirot, but it's also a good way for me to kind of like see how you can interact with these concepts and bring them down and relate to them and see them on, our lower level, so to speak.
Well, when Elishiva brought modesty into into the whole picture of things here, as she was beginning to describe it, I was kind of blew my mind here a little bit because and maybe she can correct me if I'm getting a little off on this, but if we're looking at the laws of modesty and the relationship of man and woman in terms of Chochmah and Binah and Daat, and now we're looking at of course we have the this in terms of the Mishkan as well, which we see sort of the most holy places being very hidden, but also when we look at the human psyche, um, here we have these basic axioms in our mind. We have our ability to put them together in some sort of construct, and then that what both the revelation that takes place in our being able to then envision something with them, to our ability to put them together in a way that that uh, uh, creates a construct which kind of confines the principles and yet fully manifests them in the design or in whatever we're going to do, whatever we're constructing in our mind. You know, how often have we ever expressed? We find somebody that's really smart at what they're doing, or someone who is just very mysterious to us, or what have you, but but does incredible things. We say, "Boy, I would like to crawl inside their mind for a minute." You know, it would be very creepy to say, "Boy, I'd like to go inside that husband and wife's bedroom for a little while." But in the same sense, though, when we speak of it in terms of a human psyche, what we're really saying is, I would like to see that person's Chochmah and Binah, and how they how they interact with one another, and come down into Daat, because and normally with most human beings, when we communicate with we at the level we communicate at, that level is very hidden, and even if you and I were to speak, and one person were to explain something for a while and that kind of thing, and we'd talk about a topic. Well, somebody might walk away from a conversation saying, "Boy, that guy was really amazing. That was a great conversation," and yet we still haven't seen inside that guy's mind, or that person's mind, to see what's really making them tick in there. We've only just had this amazing experience with it. And so that aspect is always very shrouded and hidden. And it's very interesting. It just is by nature. So it would stand to reason then, in terms of a husband and wife, that the rules of modesty would exist not at Chochmah, but at Binah, and at the feminine aspect, and because it's that aspect then which is which is that next level after which Daat is expressed, and so so it makes perfect sense, and so I had never even imagined wildly the the laws of modesty applying in that way. So I'm taken aback by that.
Yeah, I'm still kind of scratching the surface on that one as well, but it's amazing how when you are able to kind of like get the basic structure of how these these different Sephiroth work, you can see you're able to unpack, if you will, how they, how they represent themselves within, many aspects in life, and then you begin to see a lot of these activities or actions, whether they're commanded by Hashem or they're things that are done within Chassidus, um, where it just seems like so bizarre, and it just doesn't seem to have any real relation or bearing to anything. You can see the logic, if you will, behind it, and how it's actually connecting back to these basic framework, if you will, of reality, and it's quite fascinating and interesting.
I found the chapter, and I'm gonna kind of to skip around. I'm sorry to interrupt you.
Nope,
Um,
go.
because it's bringing in other concepts, which actually Kaplan will bring a little bit later on, which is the shattering of the vessels idea. So he says, it's the Zohar. It's called the Book of Concealment, and it's 5 short chapters. He states our codex and a digest of fundamental doctrine of Kabbalah, namely the details of how our present reality has been formed out of higher dimensional worlds pre-existent to the universe of Genesis. Why is the secret of Torah buried and not revealed? And the idea is it's a secret within a secret. And so that there's this, when the two join together, then they're not always actively enforced joining together. It's a secret within a secret. When they come together, then they reveal, when they come together in the proper way, in the perfect union, then they reveal the innermost aspects to each other, and that's where you get this intimate knowledge. And the two have to be functioning concurrently in the proper way for that Daat to be revealed completely. And one of the interesting things is when you have the idea of like the exile of the Shekhinah, the shattering of the Ten Commandments, the first set of the first tablets by Moshe when he comes down from the mountain. It's kind of the idea that you get out of is that there's this cosmic play that the script's being written in these higher levels of Chochmah, Binah, that the script for how history will play out is being set now, and there's fundamental principles that are like the spiritual DNA and the consciousness of all mankind, and there are these archetypes being buried and being sown in creation, and the program for the programming is being set for the game be put into play. The script for the play is being written, and it's the idea that these forces are being put into action to cause a certain means to an end. And as you stated before, the obvious means is that the end to this whole cosmic play is to become closer to God. And so the fundamental aspects to our reality and how the world, like the union between a male and a female to create offspring, the differences between masculine and feminine, and sometimes they overlap, but there's these differences. They're set here, and they're given for a purpose. They're not just for the point of procreation, but these are principles that are set in a creation, and like the fall of Adam and Eve in the garden, the building of the Mishkan and the temple later on, the exile of Israel, the founding of a nation to do these kind of things. These are set up in this highest level of concealment. And as these two forces play out through our understanding of linear time, you see these relationships changing. In the beginning, you have this perfect flow of Chochmah and Binah, and the relationship between the male and the female is very balanced, and everything's right and good. But when that balance is upset, and then they kind of become adversaries, and there's a deeper teaching that when you take the word for male and female, you can get fire if they're not going together perfectly. And so that is played out in the idea that while this system is set into play, it's ultimately, I hate to say it, it's kind of meant to become, because they're diametrically opposed. If they're not in proper relationship with each other, then that relationship becomes destructive in a sense. And so you see this played out in Adam and Eve's relationship in the garden. You see it played out in Israel's relationship to Hashem, and you see the same archetype being put into play at this point. The idea of a perfect relationship, a perfect flow of energy, a balance between the two, and then a disharmony, something to upset the balance, repair and coming together. And I know I'm kind of jumping off topic to topic, so please, I apologize. But there's this like trying to like pull it together in words. It's hard for me to put into words what I'm going through my mind. But I was really surprised to see that these really like very basic, very I almost say like fundamental, mundane, like how you dress and these really I always considered like really low level, boring laws really have this really deep foundation behind them and reason. And it's like jealously guarding this relationship. And again, going back to the idea that these principles being imbued into creation are really, really deep, really deep and fundamental to the very nature of Hashem. And they're easy. It's for me, it was like something that I overlooked for many years. So.
So leave it to Ella Shiva to blow our mind and then apologize for it. So that was excellent, Ella Shiva. I'm going to have to go back and watch this a few times and
Recording.
process what you just.
Yeah, I'm just a little like a little bit of a scatterbrain. But thank you.
No, you're not. No, that wasn't
the quote that I came. I don't know if you have it. It's Beyond Kabbalah. It's by Joel Bax, the book, and
yeah, Beyond Kabbalah, right?
Yeah, and and it's in reference to this idea of this really obscure verse talking about the kings of Edom being destroyed, and it's the first. And the reason he says how much time the Ari, who is another Kabbalist, devotes to this idea is he kind of is drawn to this verse because it's the first time a queen is mentioned. So you have these kings, and then for the first time in the Tanakh, a queen is mentioned in relationship to the king. And it's this idea of being able to, the first receptacle being formed to transmit the light into creation, where before this cosmic light just completely overwhelmed creation was not able to be transmitted to the lower levels. With the concept of Binah, is the first time there's a worthy receptacle that wasn't destroyed by this cosmic energy, but was actually able to act as a conduit further down to transmit this light further down the line. Oh, sorry.
One of the things that I have found an incredible amount of value in digging into Kabbalah and Chassidus is the things behind the mundane, so to speak, because there's a lot of Torah that there's a lot of Torah that makes sense, right? Steal and don't kill, and we can on a physical, very 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 materialistic level understand why that's good or bad, right? But then there's lots of them called huchim that don't really make sense. Eating kashrut. There's a lot of people that try and make kashrut make sense from a health standpoint and things like that. The attempts aren't bad. I'm not trying to downplay them, but at the end of the day, kashrut doesn't make sense truly makes sense on a health level. There's something that's going on deeper there, and then there's a lot of other things. Even getting past the 613 mitzvot and getting into the fences, the gezerot, so to speak, that the sages put in place around the 613. Like netalat yadayim, the washing of the hands in the morning, so to speak, or praying, before and after a meal. The purpose behind it, well, it can become just a vain repetition, so to speak, that you get up in the morning and do it. I'm not going to say there's not merit in doing it without having any knowledge or any even idea behind it. But Kabbalah comes along, background framework and structure, that then you can start to place these seemingly mundane acts into a system, so to speak, that then now you can begin to see the the basic concept or the idea behind what's going on, and you can then attach the value to it and begin to see the value in it. And then you're not just taking it on blind faith, so to speak, that this has some value to it, but now you're seeing the value, if you will, in it. And for me, the one that I am connect to and is easy for me to explain is the idea of the sparks and the redeeming of the sparks, and these sparks that were cast out throughout all creation when the vessels were shattered. And we'll get into the shattering of the vessels later on, so I don't want to dive too much into that. But just there's a concept that the world was created and it was shattered, and in that shattering, the light that came down before it was shattered into sparks that are concealed within the creation that we live in now. And we get to part of the work that was given to us is in redeeming those sparks and gathering those sparks, and in eating food, so to speak, right? We as beings, we exist. We have the potential, if you will, to exist on a higher level as human beings. We have the potential to connect to higher spiritual levels. We don't just exist on this material plane. And so we have the ability to elevate ourselves. Now, there's plenty of people that don't exist on any higher level than their base, animal soul. They exist here in this life, and it's very tragic because they're missing out on so much. But it doesn't mean that they don't have the potential to exist on a higher level. Well, a plant, so to speak, and a mineral, they exist on a lower level, on a very material level, right? And they don't have the capacity themselves to elevate themselves to get to a higher level. So what about the sparks, if you will, that are trapped inside that plant, or that mineral that plant brought up, right? Well, you got that mineral. It's even a more basic level, so to speak. There's no life that we would ascribe to a mineral, right? From a scientific standpoint. Well, a plant comes along and grows in the soil, and it draws up that mineral, and it takes that mineral, and it gives that mineral now the potential to participate in a form of life, which is an elevation of that mineral, so to speak. And now it's elevated, and it's involved in a life-giving act. Well, then the cow comes along, right, and it eats that grass, and that cow then gives that plant now the ability to elevate itself and to participate in an even higher form of life, right? Animals exist in a higher form of life than plants do. And then, us as human beings, we come along, and we have not just an animal soul, but we have ruach and neshama, nefesh, ruach and neshama, and then even above that, haya, and connecting all the way back up to the yehidah, which is, as I considered, a level of oneness with Hashem. And we have the potential, right, to eat that steak. And if we are intentionally involved in the process of eating that steak, with the mindset of elevating that steak, then we give that steak the opportunity to elevate to a level and to take part in our life, and in a way that it never would have before that. And the same thing kind of comes down to the sacrificial system and stuff like that. So I don't want to deviate too much into that area, but just giving me the idea behind why we would bless Hashem for the meal, and why we would pray, and the prayers that are going on, and the cleanliness that we would even attempt to bring to our own body, not just physically, but cleanliness spiritually, so to speak, so that when I'm eating the steak, right, I'm giving the steak every opportunity that it could possibly have to elevate to the highest level that it possibly could. And now all of a sudden, I'm not just eating something so that it'll keep me alive for another day, but I'm actually involved in a mitzvah that's blessing that steak and also is blessing my body. And it's something that is giving, is taking this potentially mundane act, and elevating it and giving me purpose behind it on a cosmic level, and on a level that goes back to the whole purpose of creation, which was, for us to cleave to Hashem, and in doing that, He gave us a world that had His light concealed, and so that so it has a level of deficiency, and then I'm here to rectify that deficiency. And so, in me eating the steak, I actually have the potential to rectify the deficiency that's built into creation. Anyways, it's just a understanding these more esoteric things give us the ability to relate to these mundane things and see how they actually are part of the entire makeup of creation, and we're actually involved in creation, so to speak, in the middle of doing these things. Anyways, like you, Shiva, I feel like I was a little bit scatterbrained right there, but
No,
yeah, that's my
very,
story, and I'm sticking to it.
very, very good point. I, you thought something brought something in my brain. I always used like the mitzvot weren't given for like busy work and pageantry. We didn't, the Mishkan wasn't built to be, Hashem's bling in the midst of the nation of Israel. And these commandments, even the most mundane, have some. I think they're there to provoke you, like you said, to pursue the knowledge behind them instead of just being caught up in the doing. It's the why. Why are we doing these things the way we're doing? Why can't we? Why can we eat a grasshopper, but but not this? What does that mean? Is it just like to keep, like I said, busy work and pageantry? But there's obviously a deeper meaning, and Hashem states very clearly that the purpose of the Torah given is to reveal Himself to Israel and to the nations. So it is to provoke you to like seek the why, and the deep aspects, the meaning behind the commands aren't expressly stated. I mean, I've always been amazed when I first picked up the Talmud to like one obscure verse can lead to like 4 pages of discussion, and that's the pursuit of this relationship with Hashem is to figure out the why, to get to know Hashem, you know, and why Hashem has caused the certain way, why the birds and why the grass and trees and exactly why is this system set up the way it is, and what's the purpose of this, and what's the point, and what's the ultimate direction of all of these various do's and don'ts. And it does really provoke you when you stop and think like why do we do it that way, and what's this cosmic relationship between kosher foods, like you said, and there's a very deep meaning behind that. There's a proper way to serve Hashem. There's a proper path to follow, and there's a proper method of doing things, and you can join in at various levels and in various ways, because obviously not everybody has the same talents or the same ability to rectify the world in the same way, but every purpose, there's nothing superfluous. Everything is given for a reason. Every commandment, every prohibition, every person's talent, nothing is there without cause or purpose. And that's one of the things I always have to fall back on sometimes. I'm like, why am I here again? Like, maybe you do have a purpose, and you have a special, unique or ability. Everybody has their job and their function, and they've been given all the tools necessary to fulfill that. But anyway, I'm getting a little bit preachy, so thank you.
I remember not too long. I mean, it was maybe a year ago. I was going through a daf, which is a page of Talmud, and the whole discussion. It was like a 2 hour long discussion, and it was all on going to the bathroom. And it was this really like intense discussion on and they're building off of certain verses in the Bible and this Talmudic thing, but just to how they can expand on such as what might seem like such a small concept, right? But they go into this whole explanation on, well, when you're going number one, these are the ways that you do it properly. When you're going number two, these are the ways. Obviously I'm using different language for what they said, but it would be very easy in a cynical mindset to look at that and say, oh well, that's just, I mean, splitting hairs to the nth degree, and what a silly thing. But the fascinating thing is, at the end of it, I came away walking away realizing just how significant purity was, and holiness was to these people, because it was all about that. It was all about that, and it was all connecting to these deeper understandings of that the physical universe that we're in is the physical things that we involve ourselves in aren't just physical. So, anyways, it wasn't. I don't say that bring that up to be negative towards anything in the Talmud. Actually, it was quite an amazing thing because I walked away convicted on how I do. There's so many things I do in the day that I have no intention, regarding how I do that, and so how many things how many opportunities, if you will, am I missing out on bringing a rectification, if you will, to the universe, because I'm just on autopilot, so to speak. So yeah.
Well, as we continue on in the text, the last page of the chapter, we kind of the theme kind of continues into some kind of mind blowing things, because as we begin to the text expands this into the universes and those type of things, we start to get into now we're beginning. He's expanding it into bigger, more concepts, and so so now the whole idea is being broadened as he begins to discuss the universes. And so I'll start out reading starting with the last chapter, or last paragraph on page 59. The last to be analyzed in our discussion of Chochmah and Binah is the relationship to the Tetragrammaton and the Olamot universes. Chochmah parallels Yod of the Tetragrammaton, and Binah parallels the first Hay. Thus, the coin, in essence, of existence that God wishes to bestow contains all the axioms of creation. As we have seen, the 10 sayings of creation find their parallel in the 10 Sephirot. On the level of Chochmah, these sayings are undifferentiated and are all contained within the Yod. The Yod is then Chochmah, or what is given. This is the level of Atzilut. And so, and so showing then it shows at the bottom of the page, it's showing, it's charting those a little bit. And again, I think we're all skipping ahead just a little bit as well, but these things also correspond to different levels of soul, okay, which we'll be talking about down the road as well. But when we look at how this ascending order really seems to play out and take place, we're seeing that at these higher levels, that things get very integrated and hard to define and hard to put solid boundaries on, because they become more unified. In these ideas, and as we see them coming down into Malkut, they become very much more distinct. And so, in the same sense, Seth, how you were saying in terms of, you were talking about food, we're talking about relationship, that type of thing, and the elevation that it takes in terms of going from grass to cow to us human beings. But then even beyond that, beyond us, is another step. So we are taking the entire creation and we are elevating this into the higher realms, the highest realms of, in the sense of the heavenlies. And so, in that same sense, we're taking every relationship, and when we talk about this on the level of souls, we have an interesting discussion going on. For example, in our forums, on Beit Midrash right now, and it all has to do with the transmigration of souls, that type of thing. And so, some of these ideas come across as kind of really, really bizarre and goofy, as outright pagan, or somehow Neoplatonian in their origins, all that kind of stuff. And yet, when we look at it in terms of, when even soul, when we look at, uh, um, when Hashem made the animals, for example, they all even had their own particular level of soul. And in the same way, as we integrate those into our being and elevate their souls, so too, the souls of all men, of all mankind, at the highest level, that the level of Am Israel is one man in that sense, and one soul. And so it exists in something that goes above individuality and above persona and that type of thing into a kind of a unified whole. And so when we talk, when we start talking about these ideas of, that have to do with things like, what the sages refer to as transmigration and that type of thing, we have to understand a little bit the level that they're talking about before we throw them out and that kind of thing, or that kind of thing, because they talk about all sorts of weird things, just like you were saying, Seth, in Talmud, we have everything from potty talk to young girls who have certain types of accidents take place and that type of thing. To, you name it. I mean, it seems like they seem to cover about every kind of strange type of thing that might happen to a person, but it's all for a reason. And there's a purpose behind it. And so, in these things with Cater, or with Chochmah and Binah, existing in Absolute and Berea, correspondingly, you know, it's helping me a lot. This discussion is helping me a lot to see how how the ascension really does take place, and it's helping me not just understand it on a level of Sefirot, but in my own being, my own psyche. How does it really take place? How does it really transcend my consciousness and my the way I do stuff? How do I relate to it? Because in a way, in the chapter so far, we've been kind of looking at it top down. We've been looking at it in such a way that we see how Chochmah relates to Binah, relates to Daat, and then we're and then our functioning is down here somewhere. Well, in terms of how us, down below those levels, how we in a sense, relate to those in our lives every day. These things that are beyond even our, in so many ways beyond our consciousness, beyond our really, we don't focus on these things all the time. We're usually focused on some task, or on some idea that we're thinking about, or something like that throughout our day. But in a very real sense, what we're doing then is taking these thoughts, we're taking emotions, we're taking relationships, and that type of thing, and we're bringing those, um, through these levels, as we when we study Torah, when we look at, the Sephiroth, when we study Kabbalah, those kind of things. What we're really doing is that very thing. We're taking all of our other experiences, all of these other things that we're talking about, and that seem like very ordinary and mundane things, and we are actually elevating them, um, up into onto a much higher plane, and we're giving them, um, you know an opportunity in this point in time that we're living in, this present that we're in. We're giving them an opportunity to actually literally elevate, um, to a very high realm. And so it's kind of amazing, the in a sense, as human beings, the conduit that we are for the rest of the creation, and for everything from just basic ideas to, things that we might invent, to what have you. What kind of eternal value we can really add to those things, simply because of the way we think, simply because of what we study, simply because of how we conduct ourselves and that type of thing. So it's amazing to me to think about.
Yeah, it's exciting. It takes life from being about, getting saved and into heaven, and turns it into a, being a partner, if you will, in the process of creation.
Right.
Want some chicken? Sorry, my daughter was asking for chicken. She wants to elevate it.
Um, one of the concepts that Joel Bass uses in regards to the Sephiroth is the idea of fractals. So if you're looking at the concept of the soul, the concept of Mashiach, concept of Israel, you're zooming in on one aspect only to see that it's part of, it's a fractal of another part. It looks like a leaf is actually part of a bigger thing, and it's in it. And whether you're looking up or you're looking down, it all emanates from the same source. And um, I really believe and until I got the concept that every emotion, command can be mapped out in regards to the tree of life, this Kabbalistic tree, and one of these spheres that these concepts or these actions in the world have to emanate from the spiritual realm in some fashion or form. So they have a they have a they have an origin, and they have a point of where they're conceptualized and then brought into our reality. And so everything can be mapped back to this. And right until you see the world that way, if you really do take that to heart and contemplate on that, every word you say, every action, every interaction, what you choose to do, what you choose to not do, you're either partnering or you're either helping or you're hurting. There's no middle ground. There's and that you can be partnering with Hashem in rectifying creation, just by smiling at an individual. And you can either elevate yourself and the people around you, or cause this coarse darkness and keep, obscure Hashem's light, just not just in your life, but in your family or the world around you. It really makes it I wouldn't say overwhelming. It can if you think about it, but I think it really gives you a really deep purpose in life. And um, it's a very deep concept that humans are given, such power to have an effect in creation. The angels don't even have that kind of ability. They're stuck where they are. They don't have the ability to transcend that station that they've been placed at. A tree is always going to be a tree. An angel's always going to do what an angel's going to do. But human beings can transcend to the highest levels or the lowest steps. You can cause damage in creation beyond what any other created being has the ability to do.
Yeah.
All right, my daughter was insisting on chicken, so they're going to get it right now. So I missed that last minute.
It's cute.
Yeah, she's insistent. Well, I mean, Joel, you've been quiet. You got anything you want to add, or Casey?
As far as I'm concerned, you guys have been taking care of pretty much everything that I've thought of to say.
Okay. Sorry, you got to interrupt us, man.
No, it's no big problem. I like listening to you guys.
Well, I don't like listening to you, man. So don't be shy.
Okay.
Well, I think we may be at a good stopping point then. We've covered the chapter pretty thoroughly. If anyone has any questions that watches this video later on, then and you're part of the Beit Midrash group, find the corresponding post. There is a file in the file section titled Inner Space, and I am updating it with every post. conversation posts that we have, as well as every video that we put out. So for anyone who's in Beit Midrash who's watching these, you have that resource to go back and find prior broadcasts as well. But if you have any questions on any of the specific chapters, even if it's an old one, go back and comment on it. It'll pop it at the top of the feed in Beit Midrash, and we'll start talking about it again. So keep them going online. For those of you who are watching later on, please chime in on Beit Midrash. So anything else? Anyone else have anything you want to shout out before we end the night? All right, I'll take that as a no. Everyone have a wonderful week, and Shavua Tov.
Great discussion. Thanks, everyone.
Shavua Tov.
Shvatov.